Today, I'm excited to introduce our panel, and I'm so excited to continue with the great sessions that we've been witnessing at the Outride Summit. My name is Nick Aguilera, Youth and Community Partnerships Manager at PeopleForBikes. My background is in education, urban planning, and community engagement in support of projects that make it safer, easier, more accessible, and more inclusive for people of all ages and all abilities to walk, bike, and roll through the world that we share. I'm thrilled to work with PeopleForBikes, Outride, and the bicycle industry to push for programs, policies, and infrastructure that get more kids on bikes and keep them rolling. While bicycling education is a key ingredient to get more kids on bikes, and I love the Outride hashtag, more kids on bikes, in this session, we will hear about the importance of supporting safe routes to school across both urban and rural settings, along with strategies to support safe, active travel in your community. Before we get started, I'd like to introduce our speakers for today. Up first, we'll hear from Coombs, School and Youth Organizer at Transportation Alternatives, where she advocates for safe streets for students and families. Deshandi is also an urban planning graduate student at New York University, or NYU. After that, we'll hear from Dr. Carissa Smock, an associate professor at Northcentral University, and Dr. Alicia Schinder, national educator and clinical program development leader at Ascension. Dr. Smock is a public health researcher that focuses on the disparities in connecting physical activity to clinical care and communities. Dr. Schinder's work as a national educator focuses on improving populations' health outcomes through care management. Finally, we'll hear from Kori Johnson, the Program and Engagement Manager at the Safe Routes Partnership. Kori has worked on community initiatives in New York, the Washington, D.C. metro region, and the Bay Area, and her role focuses on providing technical assistance to communities working to advance safe and equitable transportation. Thank you all for being here today. Let's welcome our first speaker, Deshandi Coombs of Transportation Alternatives.
I can't seem to turn my video on. Can everyone hear me? Okay. Well, I guess I'll just start then. So my name is Deshandi Coombs. I reside in New York City. And as Nick mentioned, I work for Transportation Alternatives as the school organizer. So in my role, I partner with schools and youth organizations. So that can be DYCD after school programs or religious affiliated after youth organizations. And in my role, I advocate with them and teach them how to advocate. And the end goal is usually a school street. But before we get into that, I'll tell you a little bit about TA's work. Next slide. So TA uses a combination of neighborhood level grassroots organizing and citywide advocacy. We have organizers in each borough to push for changes in public policy, street design, enforcement. So we focus a lot on getting bike paths, bus routes, things of that nature, bridge access. We also have a partner agency called Family for Safe Streets. So we work with families who have been unfortunate victims in vehicular crashes. And we provide them with therapy resources and just a network, and also give them the ability to tell their stories at rallies, City Hall, things of that nature. Next slide. So what is a school street? The full New York City Department of Transportation name for a school street is a full closure open street for schools. But throughout this presentation, I will just be using the term school street. So it is a street near a school building. It could be in front of, like the one pictured here, or on the side, depending on the intersection that schools choose. And it is cut off from traffic. So we have some schools in Queens that close it off from 7 a.m. to 6 p.m. because they include after school programs. We have some schools like elementary school in the Bronx who only close the street from 8 a.m. to 1 p.m. Just during their school hours. So this program started during COVID, when they wanted people to get outside, especially in neighborhoods that lived more than a 10-minute walk away from parks. However, the way the program and the application is currently run, most of the school streets are in Manhattan and belong to private schools. There are only 38 school streets in New York City, and there are over 1,600 schools. So there is an equity issue, which relates to the work that I do. Next slide. So some benefits of a school street. There are many reasons for wanting to introduce school streets for safe and healthy journeys to school, including cleaner air, low risk of traffic injury, and promoting physical activity. In New York City, many schools are co-located. So that means there are schools that share buildings. So they share outdoor facilities, they may share gym facilities, they share classroom facilities. So space is always an issue. So the push to get a school street is so that they can have access to the space and decrease, the noise pollution, which still impacts school zones regardless of the laws in place, and just to get a better learning environment to school. We also tried to encourage students to bike, roll, walk to school, but it is very difficult if your school does not have the biking infrastructure. So ironically, with the 38 schools with a school street, majority of them belonging to public school, once they get the school street, then the city sees that, oh, there's a need to implement bike racks and things of that nature for them to store the biking infrastructure, but that is not granted to other schools. So we are trying to address this inequities. On school days, streets near schools are more dangerous on average than other schools, city streets, especially during the 8 a.m. hour, when hundreds and thousands of students are commuting to and from. There are 50% more crashes and 25% more injuries per mile on streets near schools than on other city streets. And we see that this discrepancy disappears on days when schools are closed. So we know that the issue is definitely during school zones. And these streets are especially more dangerous outside schools where most students are economically disadvantaged and or students of color. In the 2019 school year, pre-COVID, for example, the rate of people injured by drivers on school days was 43% higher outside of schools where the majority of students were students of color compared to white students. Next slide. So in my work, I work with schools, and I'm currently creating a toolkit to teach schools step-by-step how to create a school street. So at Transportation Alternatives, we do the application for schools on their behalf, but I'm one person, there are over 1,000 schools. So with the toolkit, we hope that's to empower schools to be able to do it themselves. So we do step-by-step how do you meet with your PTA if you have an active PTA? If you do not have an active PTA, how do you start that process? How do you talk to legislation? How do you get letters of support? And in talking with community stakeholders, what we've heard so far is that schools don't want school streets because of these common misconceptions. So they believe that teacher parking will disappear, which is not true. If a school has, let's say, 6 teacher parkings on a street that they propose to be closed, the DOT does have the power to move the parking to an adjacent street, so the teacher will not lose parking. Also, if a teacher is already parked, most likely if a teacher is arriving at school at about 6:45, this is before the open street even begins, their car does not have to move. We just ask that the teachers do not move their car while the open street is in progress. We don't want to encourage car movement on an open street. Also, people believe that emergency services cannot get through since an open street has to be managed. So either by teachers, after school program, parents, whichever adults are with students on the street, they will be able to move the barricade. They are exempt. So emergency services can drive on open streets. And also some people believe school streets are only possible in high density neighborhoods that are walking available. So they believe if majority of their students take the bus or the train to school, then it will not help for them to have an open street. But we also believe that this is not true. Also, we want to encourage parents to take public transportation and walk. With this belief, when people are like, oh, it's not for us, so that we have to drive. We kind of want to dismiss that. You do not have to drive to school. And with you driving your student and safety, public transportation safety is a big thing in New York City. People are afraid to have their kids travel alone on public safety. So what we've also been doing are bike buses. So having a bike, recently we have one on Bergen Street, so it goes all the way from Sunset Park through East New York, all the way up to Court Street downtown area. And so kids are allowed to hop on, hop off with their bikes, skates, wheelchairs, etc. And they go to school together as a bike bus, and they hop off at various intersections. So just teaching them that these community efforts can make school streets safer. Next slide. So this brings me to the work that we're doing. So Transportation Alternatives has partnered with Open Plans, another organization who does similar work. So we've put out an interest form and a landing page to get folks who are interested in applying for school street, but may not know where to start, may need additional support. From what we heard, there's a component of the application that requires a site plan. Most teachers, principals, parents do not have any experience with urban design or creating a site plan, and that is a barrier for entry for many schools, especially if they do not have the resources or the staff to provide this information. So we came up with the interest form where folks can sign up. You can just put your email address, your school affiliation, and that is all. We don't ask you many further questions than that, and we will help you with the application process. So we do give schools the choice if you want us to do the application for you, or if you just want us to be by your side while you complete the process yourself. We want schools to have full autonomy and full choice in the path that they decide to go. But either way, they have all of our advocacy support. So any transportation data that is needed, so we can provide them with, if there are any vehicular crashes within their neighborhood in a 500-foot radius, we can conduct speed surveys, talk to council members, community boards on their behalf, and help them sign off on the application process. So the interest question in the chat, the interest form is for New York schools only. One, because this program isn't run nationwide, and also TA capacity at this moment is currently only in New York City. And that is all.
Thank you so much. And thank you for your work and for Transportation Alternatives work to really build safer streets in New York City for students and for all. A few other questions came into the chat. One, and you just mentioned, that this form that you just showed us is only for New York. What would you say would be good recommendations for how attendees, nonprofits, and other listeners in the call around the country can get involved in work like this and make this implementation happen in their schools, their communities?
Great. So according to the federal DOT website, there are only about 20 cities, I believe, with an open streets program. But one caveat to the program is DOT does not provide any funding to schools. So if an organization, like we had 134th Ave Coalition, who is a nonprofit, if they apply on behalf of the school, then they can apply for funding for the school. So we often try to encourage local businesses in the area to partner with schools so that they can get funding, because Department of Transportation will not give funding directly to schools, and they are not eligible for grants. So I feel like that's one way that nonprofits can get involved. If you know a school is interested, try to partner with them or the after school program so that you can apply for grants on their behalf.
What kind of support might lower resource schools need to get started on toolkits like what you've like you all have developed?
So in New York City specifically, a lot of the issues come from that they don't have an active PTA or PA, or they don't have anyone, they don't have a liaison in the school who is connected with the Community Education Council. And that forms as a barrier because you need a minimum of two reference letters to get approved, which they implemented this year. We're not sure why. So many of them don't know where to start. So they know that the application exists, and one, it is a really long application, so just reading through it alone can be daunting. So really helping them with like where to start, how do you talk to teachers, how do you talk to your community board, which is things like many teachers and parents, many everyday people have never done before. So that can feel like extremely confusing and frustrating, and just a barrier. And teachers in general already have a lot on their plate. So we're trying to have them do least as possible, but with staying informed.
Yeah, and it sounds like, yeah, I mean, Transportation Alternatives already has built such a good network of connection to schools in New York City to tell them in the area to tell them about this program. What if we're talking to a school in rural Oklahoma where I grew up, talking so that and they're listening in on this webinar, they're hearing about a program like this for the first time, and they haven't ever talked to the other people in their district about it. And is that the place that they should start?
So I suggest starting as small as possible. Yeah, so I suggest first starting with teachers and school admin. And I say start with them because they can be the only ones to actually sign off on the application. And so getting their buy-in would help with speaking then with families and then the immediate neighborhood. So we always suggest if you can do like a town hall setting, or get a day permit for like what you call it, they close off the street for that one day and then have the meeting on that street. So they can, what we find is people have difficulty visualizing what it will look like, especially if they've never seen it before. So if you can get a permit for that one day, have the meeting outside on the street that you want to close off, to really give residents and stakeholders a way to view what it can look like and what can happen on the street. I think that's where most of the barriers we come in. Like, you can show pictures and videos and have people talk about it, but they always think, well, that works for them and not me. So I think showing better than telling will always work.
Yeah, I think so much of it, you're right, is like there's pictures, there's videos all over the internet, but so much of it is just getting out there and feeling what it can be like to be on the street. One question just came into one last question just came in, and then I think we should jump on to we need to jump on to the next speaker. Why does the programming on the street look like, sorry, excuse me, what does the programming on the street look like on a typical school day? Is everything organized, or is there a free space for kids to roam and be safe during non-school hours?
Oh, great question. So it's a combination of both. So we have schools that use it. If it's a middle school, they let their middle schools eat lunch out there. There's also schools that use it for ESL classes or Zumba. So they have nonprofits and other organizations that come to the open street specifically to do programming. They have one school who uses it every single day, winter, rain, snow. They do whole school races. So they do races by age group. They also do like walking for elderly. So really it is up to the school on how they will use it.
That's beautiful. And then I follow you all on Instagram, and I learn a lot from the examples that you all share and the resource that you all share. Where should people go to learn more? Or would you drop it in the chat for everybody at some point?
Yeah, I guess to learn more, Instagram, but also my email directly, mostly because this is a new program. So a lot of the social media advocacy and just the output about it is less compared to the other work that TA has been doing. So just contacting me directly or through social media would be the most efficient.
Cool. Thank you so much for your time, and thank you so much for your work and the work that all of you do. Okay, we're out of time for that subsession rather. Thank you so much. Now let's welcome speakers Dr. Carissa Smock at Northcentral University and Dr. Lisa Schinder of Ascension.
Thank you so much for your introduction, Nick, and so many important insights shared with Shandy. Thank you. I too am under the weather, as you can hear. I know I've been in good company from folks at this summit, unfortunately. Excited to be here virtually and not share my germs, presenting assessing physical activity and support for youth, access to walking and bicycling to school within a rural community during the pandemic, a mixed method study, and extremely helpful work in partnership with Dr. Lisa Schinder. Next slide, please. It certainly takes a village. We couldn't do this without all of the folks within our community and the incredible support and partnerships with our Jackson Township and our schools. Next slide, please. These are the sections we'll go over today. You can move forward again. So we were wondering, is there heightened interest? Do communities have increased interest in children walking and bicycling to school to avoid crowding and address increases in youth obesity and physical inactivity due to the pandemic? We also wondered, within these communities, Jackson Township to be specific, would there perhaps be increased support for infrastructure upgrades needed for safety from traffic? We also know, according to the literature, rural communities tend to have higher injury and fatalities from collisions, while infrastructure and safety is poorer compared to urban communities. There's also a compounded disparity as youth with active parents tend to be more active themselves, according to the literature, and therefore youth of inactive parents may have even less opportunity to walk or bicycle to school, and especially when supervision is needed. Next slide, please. The purpose of this study was to assess community physical activity and support for infrastructure upgrades to increase walking and bicycling to school, safety from traffic within a rural school district during the pandemic. Next slide, please. I know I don't have to tell this crew all of the benefits of walking and cycling to school: better academic performance, improved mental and physical health, increased safety. Next slide, please. I know I also don't have to tell this crew, Safe Routes to School is a grant administered at the state level. In this case, the Ohio Department of Transportation, focusing on those youth K through 8. In this case, focusing on infrastructure upgrades for up to $400,000. Within these grant applications is a school travel plan that is required to be completed, that includes studies and documents to assess communities' intentions around active transportation. Next slide, please. Within the school travel plan, we are measuring where students are coming from a map and walk audit, what travel mode they're using from teacher tallies and observation, the support from the community through parent survey, stakeholder and community meetings and signatures, to then recommend solutions and countermeasures. Next slide, please. From this, we try to then connect this practice application to research and put this within a mixed method convergent parallel design. So here you can see that we took all of those quantitative and qualitative measures, divvied them out, and then integrated that data to come up with this convergent parallel design. From there, we conducted member checking and data triangulation to go back to our community members and ensure that we measure the implications that our community members intended us to before we went and finalized our report and submitted it to ODA. Next slide, please. From there, we added measures that were validated that are beyond the requirements of our application. We wanted to look at physical activity of both parents and of the students before and during the pandemic. So you can see a list of those activities that we asked about. Then we also used the parent survey, which has also been validated. Next slide, please. We also were able to use the social ecological model when doing this. As we explained, we're able to explore community, interpersonal, and individual factors that support walking and bicycling to school. Next slide, please. Here you can see the evidence of need. This is our radius map, as many of you probably included in your applications. The schools in the middle there, the dots or the students within that 2-mile radius. There's also a crash report here. And we were also able to get insights from our partners at the sheriff's office that shared that there were even more incidents of actually fatalities, unfortunately, after our data were collected. Next slide, please. Here you can see the support from both our schools and the township. Next slide, please. And here you can see our audit with the conditions. And that image on the furthest left side is really what inspired this whole project. So students have to go, if you can see that white fence, there is a neighborhood back there that actually connects to several others. Just hundreds of students that can go from that intersection and would have to walk or cycle along that guardrail next to very busy traffic to then get to a pretty decent infrastructure. As you can see, the sidewalks and the crosswalks. Next slide, please. Here you can see the ratings from parents. They only gave a 1.4 out of 5 in their safety rating, largely due to this. Next slide, please. Here's an overview of our sample. It was pretty representative of our population, aside from mostly females answering it. Next slide, please. Here you can see there was a significant increase in parent physical activity during the pandemic compared to before the pandemic, and an increase, though not significant, in youth physical activity during the pandemic. So this goes against what a lot of the predictions were and what a lot of other studies found. Next slide, please. Here you can see a moderate positive correlation between parent physical activity and youth physical activity, and that there were no strong correlations between parents' physical activity and parents believing youth walking or bicycling to school was safe, fun, healthy, or encouraged. So that correlation between parents and children's activity was what we thought and what aligns with what the literature already says. However, we did think that we might see those correlations between parents' activity and those beliefs around walking or cycling, but that just didn't happen in the numbers here. Next slide, please. Here you can see our qualitative themes that came through. So there was an interest in walking and bicycling to school to benefit health and avoid crowding, traffic calming and driver education, accountability, a need for protected paths and crossings, and increased enforcement of laws and surveillance of youth. And some example quotes there as well. Next slide, please. Here, we are integrating our quantitative and our qualitative results through a ranking. It was no surprise that those protected paths or need for sidewalk came to fruition, number one, far above all of the other items here. After that were traffic calming and education, driver accountability, then that increasement of enforcement laws and surveillance, and then finally the interest in benefits for health and avoiding crowding. Next slide, please. Here you can see the map that we worked with our engineer to create. So that green along the right-hand side is that path that connects from that neighborhood photo that I showed you, all the way down and around to the yellow where the schools are located. All of those lines are proposals for sidewalk. Next slide, please. Here we zoom into the schools and the sidewalk for in front of the schools and some other neighborhoods on the other side. You can see a little bit better here. Next slide, please. Here we worked with our engineer to divvy out the monies. Fortunately, we had that support from our township and our schools because we did go over a bit. Next slide, please. and our implications, we did find that community members were interested, excuse me, and this rural district had a heightened increase in youth walking and cycling to school. No matter how active community members were, however, the need for a safer infrastructure, holding drivers accountable, and I almost made it, monitoring youth are needed for support of youth walking and bicycling to school, despite the correlation between active parents and youth being active. And we were able to get our funding. We're very excited. Fiscal year 2024, that's less than a year away. Next slide, please. And here, you just ask for any questions.
Thank you, Dr. Smock. A few questions have come in via the chat. One of the first, what can rural communities do to raise awareness and advocate for safe infrastructure when public resources may be limited?
So there's infrastructure and non-infrastructure awards that are out there. And I think getting your different community stakeholders together to rally around this, look at what you have that is helpful. Do you have any pieces of sidewalk or protective paths or any pieces of, crosswalks? And start working around those first, because I think that's what becomes attractive to funders. That's what we understood in our case. We had some projects not included in this because this was focused on K through 8, but our high school is just very close to this as well. And the parks were working on something with the high school on the other side of this block. So I think looking at that low-hanging fruit, looking at what you do have and incremental upgrades from there.
And after these interventions have been successfully constructed and engineered, which, I've heard about the importance of us thinking about the prioritization of education, engineering, and engagement, in the Safe Routes to Schools programs around the country. Is there still some hesitation by youth to walk or bike to school, even once the sidewalks are built or the bike infrastructure is built?
We are hypothesizing that. So, we have not started the construction, and that is part of the beauty of this project is we are starting with the research from ground zero before any of this is built, or we knew it was going to be built. So we're going to take measures. We're going to keep collecting those quantitative and qualitative data from our parents, from our community members, to listen to them and better understand, okay, we've confirmed we have this plan in place. We have the monies to build this. What else do you need to feel comfortable? And then check in with them again, multiple data point collections. Okay, so, we've implemented these programs. How are they working? Now that you've had a chance to use the infrastructure, what else do we need to do? So we're thinking this is a very long-term support that needs to continue on, and we're excited to just keep supporting this community and keep finding other money resources to put those other non-infrastructure support programs in place.
Yeah, thank you so much for your work, Dr. Smock. I want to go look at these tables in even more depth after the summit, and continue to spread this message to make biking safe and better for everyone, across the entire country, like you all are in rural communities. Our last speaker, I'd like to invite to the stage now, Kori Johnson, our Safe Routes partnership, of the Safe Routes Partnership. Welcome, Kori.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me. Thanks, Nick. So I am here today to talk about how to get a Safe Routes to School program going. So I think the previous two speakers were a great lead up into my presentation, because this kind of frames what they were talking about in the context of a Safe Routes to School program. Next slide, please. So for those of you who might be unfamiliar with Safe Routes Partnership, we are a national organization whose mission is to advance safe walking and rolling to and from schools and everyday destinations for people of all races, backgrounds, ages, abilities, and disabilities. Next slide, please. Like Nick mentioned, my name is Kori Johnson. I'm a program and engagement manager here at the partnership. We are a national group, so I am based in Washington, D.C., but I work with communities all across the country, supporting safe routes to school programs and other active transportation programs. Next slide, please. So I'm going to start just by giving a little bit of background on what Safe Routes to School is. Next slide. So Safe Routes to School is really a movement and a program to make school travel, so that can include walking, biking, rolling, being on scooters, skateboards, using mobility devices, safer, convenient, and fun for kids of, again, all ages, backgrounds, genders, races, abilities, and disabilities. And this is a movement that's been going on for over 15 years, and it continues to grow and has a lot of momentum and enthusiasm. Next question, next slide, please. So we know that there's been a sharp decline in students walking and rolling to school. Looking, back to the 1960s, about half of students were walking and bikes and cycling to school. And today that number is increasing. The date for this statistic, it was around 13%. And even today, like as Dr. Smock was just talking about in the community that she was working with, those numbers are still pretty low compared to what they were in the past. Next slide, please. We also know that family car trips are increasing, again, especially over, the height of the pandemic and as schools were reopening. There are a lot of parents and families who wanted to drive their students to school. We've all seen those long car loops in the morning or in afternoons. So it seems like, students being driven to school are still at higher rates than students who are walking and bicycling. And that can be everything just from, regular, behaviors around walking and rolling to not having the infrastructure to walk and roll safely. We also know that injuries and fatalities are higher in lower income neighborhoods and in schools that have less resources and more affluent schools. Next slide, please. So the good news is that we know that Safe Routes to School works. So Safe Routes to School, it's an evidence-based program. We know that this can lead to an increase in walking and rolling to school, a decrease in pedestrian injuries and fatalities around school campuses, and just having students who are more overall more physically active. Next slide, please. So Dr. Smock also shared another version of this infographic that we have of the benefits of Safe Routes to School. So again, these are a lot of things you all are familiar with. There are so many benefits to Safe Routes to School, whether it's just being able to connect with your friends and peers. That community connectedness piece is really important. Again, especially after coming out of students, learning remotely, being able to walk and roll with their friends is a great benefit. Traffic safety benefits. So having the infrastructure and street design that that will make streets overall safer for people who are walking and rolling, climate benefits, not having all of those car emissions, even cost benefits, not being able to spend money on gas, which I know would be, a welcome change for those of us who are looking at the gas prices these days, not having to operate a fleet of school buses and having students walk and roll to school. So again, many, many different benefits of having a Safe Routes to School program. Next slide, please. So thinking about how Safe Routes to School programs are organized, there are programs that are teeny tiny that are just in one school, all the way to like these kind of large state programs. So at a local level, Safe Routes programs are usually organized by a city, county, school, school district. Sometimes a community organization or a nonprofit might run the program. And again, these programs can serve one school or many schools. Then on the state level, Safe Routes programs are usually administered by a state DOT. Sometimes it might be in coordination with a health department or another state agency. And these are large programs that actually provide resources to support the smaller programs. Next slide, please. So again, as Dr. Smock mentioned, there are different ways that you can organize your program in different program projects and activities. So there are those infrastructure projects, like was mentioned in the previous presentation. So those can be things like sidewalk construction, bike lanes, speed reduction mechanisms, curb extensions. And there are also the non-infrastructure activities, which tend to be sometimes easier to implement because they're cheaper and don't take as much time as the large infrastructure projects. So those are activities like Walk and Roll to School Day, walking school bus programs, bike trains, walking Wednesdays. So anything that does not involve changing the infrastructure of the street. Next slide, please. So funding your program, people always want to know, Safe Routes to School sounds great. How do you pay for it? And there are lots of ways to do that. Safe Routes to School funds can go to a variety of things, whether it's staff salaries, like hiring a Safe Routes to School coordinator, infrastructure improvements, program incentives, so like that swag that kids get on Walk to School Day that they love, expenses for activities, and even just general operating funds. Next slide, please. So common funding sources, a lot of times Safe Routes to School, they have great, program champions and volunteers who generously give over their time to support the program, health funds, foundation grants, business sponsorships, general funds. And next slide, please. And then, of course, there are the transportation funds. A lot of people have been talking about. There's just more funding available now for Safe Routes to School projects, both infrastructure and non-infrastructure related. There's a transportation alternatives program, and then also local transportation measures. We do have a federal policy blog on our website that kind of goes over all the different ways you can fund a Safe Routes to School program and some of the funding that's available now. So I definitely check that out, and I can put that in the chat box as well. Next slide, please. So kind of like the heart of a Safe Routes to School program is usually the Safe Routes to School coordinators. This is usually a funded position, although not always, but a lot of times it is, where of a person who manages the overall Safe Routes to School program. So they're kind of like the person who can coordinate between the school district, the municipality, other stakeholders. They lead a lot of program activities, seek funding, do some of the data and evaluation pieces as well, in collaboration with their partners. Next slide, please. And then there's the 6 E's of Safe Routes to School, which is like the basic Safe Routes to School program framework. So this is like the foundation for any Safe Routes to School program revolves around these six topic areas, which are engagement, equity, encouragement, engineering, education, and evaluation. And we suggest that having a little bit of each one, so having a comprehensive approach to Safe Routes to School is, is the best way to put your program together. Next slide, please. Next slide. So just going through quickly some education and encouragement activities and why that matters. Again, these are things that build momentum. They're fun, they're inspiring, they can increase program participation, and even raise awareness about traffic safety issues in the community. Next slide, please. So these are things like I mentioned before: walk and roll to school day, walking school bus programs, bike rodeos, even walk audits, and remote drop off and pickup programs. And these are all things you can customize to fit your community. So the great thing about Safe Routes to School is that no two programs are the same. It really is what you want to make it. Next slide, please. So just a quick spotlight of a great program in Charlotte, North Carolina, and Mecklenburg County. So this is a program that is housed in Mecklenburg County Public Health. They do a lot of really great bike education work, partnering with PE teachers. They have a walking school bus program and a bike train program, and they're doing wonderful traffic garden projects. So this is one way that I guess a county program is incorporating some of those education and encouragement activities, specifically around biking to school. Next slide, please. Another great program also focused on biking is in Tucson, Arizona. Their program is run by a local nonprofit, and again, doing a lot of great work around bike clubs, bike leader training. They offer mobile bike repair clinics, walking school bus programs, even like Safe Routes to School mapping. I think the next few slides show students who are working on their bike repairs and earn a bike programs. I'm going to go to the next slide. Yep, these are just students who are working in their shop, putting in their work to earn a bike. Next slide, please. Their bike clubs. Next slide. Yeah, so that's just a little snippet of what Safe Routes to School is. And if you're interested in starting a program on your own or developing a program, we do have a whole building blocks toolkit all about how to start a Safe Routes to School program. It has information about, again, the 6 E's, the program framework, some initial Safe Routes activities, how to start a Safe Routes to School task force, action planning, and then also customizable templates and resources. And I can drop that link in the chat box as well. And there's my information. If you have any more questions, feel free to reach out. I'm always here to help and support you developing a Safe Routes to School program. So that's it for me. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you so much, Kori. I love seeing these examples. I know that some of the questions that are dropping into the chat are about, where do people go for resources? So yeah, please put that link so that people can go there to look for what the process should look like or could look like, and
Sure.
places for examples. One good question that came through, what are some key differences you might see in the approach of safe routes projects that need to take place given rural versus urban environments?
Yeah, so I think that, like I was saying, no two safe routes programs are the same. And I think that, depending on the context of your community, that, what you need is different. So I've seen a lot of our programs in rural communities do focus heavily on infrastructure, just because a lot of the times the infrastructure for safe walking and biking is not there. I've also seen a lot of creativity and innovation around what safe routes to school can look like in spite of some of the infrastructure barriers. So doing things like walking on campus or having remote drop off and pick up, programs and, kind of getting creative with the space that you're in. So that's one difference that I've seen. Whereas, actually in some urban communities too, I'm in DC and we don't have a yellow school bus program. So all of our students actually take transit to school. So sometimes that's, safe routes to transit, like safe routes to your subway stop or metro stop or how to, bike on a city street. That might be more of a program focus area. So it's just asking your community, what do you all need? What would make you feel safer walking and biking? And then building your program based on that.
I've loved seeing the videos from Coach Sam Balto up in Portland, Oregon, with those giant school buses that they've been running out in Portland.
Yeah.
And it's incredible to look at the stats of how many students want to participate in our biking to school those days. And I know that you see these pictures of these kids having such joy, and also parents in the neighborhood coming out into the street to watch, and I feel like that is such a potential impetus to spark even more
Totally
change in active transportation. How do we change people's perspectives if they're ever opposed to safe routes to schools projects, or how do we get buy-in from caregivers in the community?
Yeah, I think that piece about joy is actually really important. I think that joy is such an underrated, method of advocacy and changing people's minds. And so I've actually just seen, word of mouth, spreading those photos, those videos, inviting people out. And it might just start with, one parent or caregiver talking to somebody else, and then it grows. I've also seen there are a lot of schools, districts and communities in general that like to show off they're doing great things. So if there's a school and they're doing a school streets program, and the school down the street's wait a second, I want my school to have, school streets from the walking school bus program or whatever. So some of it is just, finding out what motivates people and making things feel accessible and joyful. And that community engagement piece is a huge part of Safe Routes to School. So a lot of this is really just about relationship building, finding out what people care about, and then seeing how you can help support them in getting what it is that they need or care about.
And two more quick questions, and then I know our session's over. Is there a good repository of these great examples that you know of or that you could share?
Yeah, so again, I'll share the link to our website. We also have the Safe Routes to School listserv, which is very active. People are sharing all kinds of resources, photos, links to articles. So if you want to sign up for that, I can also put the information to that in the chat box as well.
Yeah, please put that in the chat, and we'll make sure that we send it out to the entire audience.
Sure.
And then lastly, how to best engage schools with limited staff capacity?
Again, big issue, especially nowadays. I say that relying on partnerships as much as possible, and also come to the school ready with a plan. So say, here's what I can do. I have the plan done. I've done the work for you. Just say yes, and I'm ready to go, because school staff, they just don't have the capacity to even think about how to plan some of this. So the more planning you can do on the front end and going and saying that you're prepared, that totally helps get that school buy-in.
Cool. Thank you so much, Kori. Thank you all so much for this time. I mean, there's nothing, that brings us as much happiness as being on a bike, let alone the kids that we see in these videos of Coach Balto on the streets or elsewhere in in communities around the country. Thank you. We're excited. We'll share all these slides and these resources so that we can all work on making biking better and safer for everyone in our communities all around the country, especially around schools. I know we've all learned a lot to take back to our friends and our communities. Let's make sure to talk to each other and share these resources and what we've learned today. I know it's time for a lunch break, so let's make sure that we get out, move around. rest a little bit, and we'll see you back for our final session at 1 p.m. Pacific time. Thank you all so much for your time today.